The war room fell silent when Commander Zethel walked inside. His 4 eyes scanned the holographic display floating above the central table, showing the same terrible images that had kept him awake for weeks. Red dots covered the galactic map like a disease. Each dot was a colony lost to the Devourer swarm. Each dot was millions of lives consumed by the endless hunger of the insectoid horde. The Galactic Coalition had fought the swarm for 300 years. They had thrown everything they had at the enemy. Fleets of warships, armies of soldiers, weapons that could crack moons in half. Nothing worked. The swarm adapted to every attack. They learned from every defeat. They kept coming, wave after wave, eating their way across the stars. But the Coalition had one weapon they had never used. One machine so powerful that it could turn the tide of the war forever. The problem was that nobody could control it. The Horizon Breaker stood in a massive hangar on Coalition Station 17. It was a war mech 400 meters tall, built from the strongest metals in the galaxy. Its weapons could destroy entire fleets. Its shields could survive a direct hit from a planetary defense cannon. The greatest engineers from 100 worlds had spent 3 centuries building it. Zethel had visited the hangar many times. He always felt small standing beneath the giant machine, looking up at its dark armor and silent weapons. The Horizon Breaker was supposed to save them all. Instead, it just sat there, waiting for pilots who could make it work. The neural interface was the problem. The machine was too complex for any single mind to control. The pilot had to manage weapons, shields, movement, sensors, and 1,000 other systems all at the same time. The mental load was so heavy that it required 10 elite pilots working together in perfect harmony. Even then, they could only access a small part of the mech's true power. The Velthari were known across the galaxy for their mental discipline. Their monks could meditate for years without moving. Their warriors could calculate battle strategies while fighting at full speed. But even the best Velthari pilots struggled to share the neural load without losing synchronization. The Corax were a hive-minded species. They shared thoughts like humans shared words. A group of Corax could move as one body, think as one mind. They were supposed to be perfect for the Horizon Breaker. But something about the machine's interface disrupted their connection. 10 Corax pilots would start out synchronized, but within minutes, they would drift apart, each one losing track of the others. The Luminari were beings made of pure energy. They had existed since the early days of the universe. Their minds could process information faster than any computer. When they tried to pilot the Horizon Breaker, 3 of them burned out completely. Their light faded and never came back. After that, no Luminari volunteered again. Zethel had watched dozens of pilot teams try and fail. He had read hundreds of reports explaining why the machine could not be used. He had attended countless meetings where scientists argued about theoretical solutions that never worked in practice. And all the while, the swarm kept advancing, and the Coalition kept losing. Then the humans arrived. Zethel remembered the day their delegation first appeared before the Coalition assembly. They were small creatures, soft and fragile, with only 2 eyes and 1 heart. They came from a planet called Earth in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy, a region so remote that most species had never bothered to explore it. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. By galactic standards, they were infants. Most of the assembly representatives laughed at the human request to join the Coalition. What could such a primitive species offer? They had no advanced weapons. They had no mental powers. They had no special abilities of any kind. They were just ordinary creatures from an ordinary world, asking to join a war they could not possibly understand. But the Coalition was desperate. They accepted the humans, mostly because they needed bodies to fill the dangerous jobs that other species refused to do. Cleaning radiation leaks, repairing hull breaches in combat, scouting enemy territory, the kind of work that killed people fast. Jake Morrison was one of the first humans to arrive at Coalition Station 17. He was 32 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Back on Earth, he had been a fighter pilot in the military. He was good at his job, maybe the best. But something had happened during a classified mission, something that got him discharged and left him with nowhere to go. He drifted through space for a few years after that, taking whatever work he could find. Cargo hauling, security jobs, anything that let him fly. When he saw the Coalition recruitment advertisements promising good pay for mech pilots, he signed up without thinking twice. He did not care about the war or the alien politics. He just wanted to fly again. The Coalition assigned him to a support unit, a team of humans who helped maintain the equipment that real pilots used. Jake spent his days cleaning sensor arrays and checking power cables. It was boring work, but it paid enough to keep him fed and housed. He told himself that was enough, but every night he walked past the hangar where the horizon breaker stood waiting. He looked up at the massive machine and felt something stir inside him. It was the same feeling he used to get before a combat mission, back when he was still a pilot. The feeling that he was meant for something more. One evening, a luminary technician named Valise caught him staring at the mech. She floated beside him, her glowing form casting soft light across the hangar floor. She had been studying humans since they arrived, trying to understand why such a weak species kept volunteering for dangerous work. "You are fascinated by it," Valise said. Her voice sounded like bells ringing in the distance. Jake nodded slowly. "It is beautiful. It is useless," Valise replied. "A weapon nobody can wield." The Coalition spent 300 years building a monument to failure. Jake looked at her with a strange smile. "Maybe you just have not found the right pilots yet." Valise laughed, or at least made the sound that Luminari used for laughter. "The right pilots? We have tested every species in the Coalition. The machine is simply too much for any mind to handle." "Then, maybe you need a different kind of mind," Jake said. He walked away before Valise could respond, leaving her floating alone in the shadow of the horizon breaker. She watched him go with something like curiosity flickering in her luminous form. Humans were strange creatures. They had no special abilities, no obvious strengths. But there was something about them that she could not quite understand, something that made them believe impossible things were possible. 3 days later, the Coalition opened pilot aptitude testing to all species. It was a routine assessment designed to identify candidates with potential neural compatibility. Nobody expected much from the human volunteers. Their brains were ordinary organs, made of the same basic chemistry as a million other species across the galaxy. But Jake Morrison signed up anyway. He walked into the testing facility with the same tired eyes and quiet confidence he always carried. The technicians barely looked at him as they connected him to the assessment interface. They had no idea what was about to happen. The testing room was cold and white. Jake sat in a metal chair at the center, surrounded by machines that hummed with energy. Wires connected to his head, arms, and chest, measuring every signal his body produced. A dozen technicians watched from behind a glass wall, their alien faces showing various degrees of boredom. Valise was among them, her glowing form dimmer than usual. She had processed 37 human candidates that week. None of them had scored above 8% synchronization with the neural interface. Most species peaked around 12%. The best Valkyrie pilot in history had reached 31%, a record that had stood for 200 years. Beginning assessment, a Corax technician announced through the speaker system. Subject 42, human male. Designation Jake Morrison. Initiating neural bridge in 3, 2, 1. Jake felt a sudden rush of cold electricity flood through his skull. The sensation was familiar. Back on Earth, he had undergone a classified procedure that the military called Project Mindlink. They had implanted a neural enhancement device in his brain, something that allowed human pilots to interface directly with advanced combat systems. The project was shut down after the incident that ended his career, and Jake was sworn to secrecy about everything he had experienced. He never told anyone about the implant still sitting quietly in his cerebral cortex. He never told anyone that his brain had already learned to process machine data like a second language. The assessment interface connected to his consciousness. And suddenly Jake could feel the ghost of the Horizon Breaker systems. It was just a simulation, a tiny fraction of the real machine's complexity. But even this small taste was overwhelming for most species. For Jake, it felt like coming home. The monitoring screens began to flicker. Numbers climbed across the display, tracking his synchronization rate in real time. 10%, 15, 20. Valise looked up from her datapad, her luminous form pulsing with sudden interest. She had never seen a human reach 20% before. She had never seen any species reach that number so quickly. 20-5%, 30, 35. The Corax technician leaned forward, his compound eyes widening. This cannot be correct. The calibration must be faulty. The calibration is fine, another technician replied, her voice trembling. I checked it myself this morning. 40%, 45, 50. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility. The assessment was programmed to automatically terminate at 50% synchronization. Anything beyond that level was considered dangerous. The neural load could cause permanent brain damage, seizures, or death. But the system was not shutting down. Jake was still climbing. 55%, 65. Valise moved toward the emergency controls, ready to disconnect the interface manually. But something stopped her. The human's vital signs were stable. His heart rate was elevated but steady. His brain activity showed intense processing, but no signs of distress or damage. He was handling the load as if it were nothing. 70%, 75, 80. Word spread through the station like wildfire. Scientists abandoned their work and ran toward the testing facility. Military officers pushed through crowded hallways. Even Commander Zethel left his war room. Drawn by reports of something impossible happening in the assessment center, he arrived just in time to see the numbers. Past 90%. The room fell completely silent. Every alien present stared at the display with expressions ranging from disbelief to fear. No species had ever achieved 90% synchronization. The theoretical maximum was supposed to be around 40% for any single mind. What this human was doing should have been physically impossible. 92%, 95, 90-7. Jake opened his eyes. The interface was still active, still connected, still feeding data directly into his enhanced brain. He looked through the glass at the assembled aliens, watching him like he was some kind of monster. He saw their shock, their confusion, their fear. And he smiled. Is there supposed to be more? He asked calmly. Nobody answered. Nobody could find the words. The assessment ended automatically at 97%, the highest synchronization ever recorded in Coalition history. Jake sat quietly while technicians disconnected the wires from his body. His nose was bleeding slightly, and he felt a dull ache behind his eyes, but otherwise he felt fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt alive in a way he had not experienced since his flying days on Earth. Commander Zethal pushed through the crowd and stood directly in front of Jake. His four eyes studied the human with an intensity that made everyone else step back. How did you do that? Zethal demanded. Jake wiped the blood from his nose and shrugged. I just did what the machine asked me to do. That is not an answer. No species has ever achieved what you just demonstrated. Our scientists have spent centuries trying to enhance neural compatibility, and you walk in here and break every record we have. Tell me how. Jake met the commander's gaze without flinching. He thought about telling the truth. He thought about explaining Project Minlink and the classified experiments that had changed his brain forever. But those secrets belonged to Earth, to a government that had thrown him away like garbage. He owed them nothing. Humans are survivors, Jake said simply. We adapt to whatever the universe throws at us. Maybe your other species are too specialized, too evolved for one particular environment. Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Our brains learned to handle chaos because chaos was all we ever knew. Zethel stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Valles, who had been watching the exchange with fascination. Run the test again, the commander ordered. Use the full simulation this time, not the abbreviated version. I want to know exactly what this human is capable of. The second test lasted 3 hours. Jake interfaced with a complete simulation of the Horizon Breaker, experiencing every system the massive mech contained. He felt weapons powerful enough to destroy stars. He felt shields strong enough to survive the heart of a supernova. He felt engines that could carry him across the galaxy in the blink of an eye, and he controlled all of it, alone. When the test finally ended, Jake was exhausted. His body trembled with the effort of processing so much data for so long. But his synchronization rate had actually improved. 98.6%. Nearly perfect compatibility with a machine designed to require 10 elite pilots. Zeth Al looked at the results and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Hope. Can you pilot it? He asked Jake. The real machine, not a simulation. Can you control the Horizon Breaker by yourself? Jake thought about the question carefully. He remembered the ghost of the mech systems flowing through his mind, the incredible power waiting to be unleashed. He remembered the feeling of being connected to something far greater than himself. Yes, he said. I can. Zethal nodded slowly. Then may whatever gods your species believes in help us all. Because you, human, might be the only thing standing between the coalition and complete annihilation. Outside the testing facility, news of Jake's achievement spread across the station. Within hours, it would spread across the galaxy. A human had done the impossible. A member of the youngest, weakest, most overlooked species in the coalition had shattered records that had stood for centuries. Everything was about to change. The Horizon Breaker launched from Coalition Station 17 with a roar that shook the entire structure. Jake sat alone in the command sphere at the heart of the giant mech, surrounded by neural interface nodes that connected directly to his brain. The moment the full connection activated, he stopped being just a human. He became something more. He could feel the reactor burning in his chest, a fusion heart pumping enough power to light up a small moon. He could feel the weapons arrays tingling in his fingertips, plasma lances and graviton hammers waiting to be unleashed. He could feel the hull plating wrapped around him like armor, layers of reinforced metal that could survive impacts that would vaporize ordinary ships. The sensation was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. Jake had flown fighter jets back on Earth. He had felt the rush of pushing a machine to its limits, the thrill of dancing with death at supersonic speeds. But this was something completely different. This was not just flying. This was becoming a god of war. The journey to the Meridian system took 11 hours at maximum acceleration. Jake spent that time learning his new body, testing the limits of his connection to the mech systems. He practiced aiming weapons at asteroids. He practiced dodging debris fields. He practiced thinking at the speed that the Horizon Breaker demanded. By the time he reached the edge of the Meridian system, He was ready. The swarm fleet waited for him like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. Thousands of bioorganic warships, each one a twisted nightmare of chitin and teeth. They ranged in size from small fighters, no bigger than cars, to massive carrier vessels that could swallow entire cities. They pulsed with alien life, communicating through pheromones and neural links that connected them into a single, hungry mind. The swarm had conquered dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. They had eaten worlds, devoured populations, and grown stronger with every victory. They had never been stopped, only slowed. They had never known fear. That was about to change. Jake did not wait for the swarm to attack. He pushed the horizon breaker forward at full speed, diving directly into the heart of their formation. The mech moved with a grace that should have been impossible for something so large. 400 meters of metal and weapons, dancing through space like a fighter jet. The first swarm ships tried to intercept him. Jake raised one massive arm and unleashed the plasma lance. A beam of superheated energy cut through the darkness, slicing through 3 carrier vessels in a single sweep. The ships exploded into fragments of burning chitin and frozen organic matter. More enemies swarmed toward him from every direction. Fighters, hundreds of them, each one carrying acid weapons that could eat through normal starship armor. They surrounded the horizon breaker, like angry insects attacking an intruder in their hive. Jake activated the point defense grid. Thousands of tiny weapons mounted across the mech's hull began firing automatically, tracking and destroying targets faster than any organic mind could process. The fighters died by the dozen, their burning remains bouncing off the horizon breaker's shields. A massive carrier tried to ram him from behind. Jake spun the mech around and caught the ship with one giant hand. He could feel the alien vessel struggling in his grip, its organic hull pulsing with desperate life. He squeezed, and the carrier crumpled like paper. Then he threw the wreckage into another group of approaching ships, scattering them like bowling pins. The battle raged across the system. Jake moved through the swarm fleet like a storm made of metal, leaving destruction in his wake. He used every weapon the horizon breaker possessed. Plasma lances carved through enemy formations. Graviton hammers crushed ships into dense balls of matter. Missile swarms hunted down fleeing targets. Energy shields absorbed attacks that would have destroyed entire planetary defense networks. Coalition observers watched from a safe distance, recording everything. They had expected Jake to struggle. They had expected him to need help, or to retreat, or to die. Instead, they watched a single human do what the entire coalition military had failed to accomplish for 300 years. He was winning. The swarm commanders, if such creatures could be called commanders, began to panic. Their usual tactics were not working. They could not overwhelm the horizon breaker with numbers because Jake destroyed them faster than they could arrive. They could not outmaneuver him because his neural interface allowed him to react faster than their hive mind could coordinate. They tried a new strategy. A group of the largest carrier ships formed a ring around Jake, preparing to self-destruct simultaneously. The combined explosion would be enough to damage even the horizon breaker shields. It was a sacrifice play, spending hundreds of ships to destroy one enemy. Jake saw it coming. He felt the enemy ships powering up their organic reactors, preparing for the massive detonation. A normal pilot would have tried to escape. A normal pilot would have retreated and waited for the explosion to fade. Jake was not a normal pilot. He pushed the horizon breaker's engines to their absolute limit, accelerating toward the ring of ships instead of away from it. At the last possible moment, he activated the graviton hammer in a way no one had ever tried before. Instead of using it as a weapon, he used it as a shield, creating a bubble of warped space around the mech that bent the explosion away from him. The carrier ships detonated. The energy release was visible from planets across the system, a flash of light brighter than the local sun. When the light faded, The horizon breaker was still there, battered but intact, standing in the center of a sphere of empty space where the enemy ships had been. The swarm fleet hesitated. For the first time in their entire history as a species, they experienced something that might be called fear. This single enemy had killed thousands of their number. This single machine had shrugged off their most desperate attack. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. Jake did not give them time to recover. He pushed forward again, attacking the remaining ships with relentless fury. He was tired. His brain ached from the strain of processing so much data for so long. Blood dripped from his nose and ears, signs that even his enhanced neural pathways were reaching their limits. But he did not stop. He could not stop. 3 billion people were counting on him. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, the swarm invasion fleet was nothing but scattered debris drifting through the void. Thousands of enemy ships destroyed. Millions of swarm creatures killed. The largest military victory in Coalition history, achieved by a single pilot in a single machine. Jake slumped in the command sphere, barely conscious. The neural interface was still active, still connected, but he could barely feel it anymore. His body had given everything it had to give. Medical ships raced toward the horizon breaker as soon as the last enemy was confirmed destroyed. They found Jake unconscious, bleeding, and barely alive. The doctors said he should have died 10 times over from neural strain alone. They said his brain had pushed past every known limit of human endurance. But he was smiling. 3 billion people were safe. The swarm had been stopped, and humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in a way that nobody would ever forget. The news traveled faster than light itself. Within hours of Jake's test, every major species in the Coalition knew what had happened. A human, a member of a race that most aliens consider barely worth noticing, had achieved perfect synchronization with the most powerful weapon ever created. The impossible had become real. The reactions were mixed. Some species celebrated. The Meridian Alliance, a group of smaller races who had suffered greatly from swarm attacks, saw Jake's achievement as a sign of hope. Finally, someone could use the horizon breaker. Finally, they had a chance to fight back against the endless hunger that devoured their worlds, but other species were not so happy. Admiral Vorath of the Corax Collective called an emergency session of the Coalition Assembly. His compound eyes gleamed with anger as he stood before the gathered representatives, his voice sharp and cold. "This human is a threat," Vorath declared. "We know nothing about his species. We know nothing about how he achieved what he claims to have achieved. For all we know, this could be the first step in an invasion plan. The humans arrive claiming to be weak and primitive, and suddenly one of them can control our greatest weapon? This is too convenient." Murmurs rippled through the assembly hall. Many representatives nodded in agreement. The timing was suspicious. The humans had been in the Coalition for less than a year, and already one of them had surpassed every other species in a critical military capability. Commander Zethel stepped forward to defend Jake. "Admiral Vorath, I understand your concerns, but I witnessed the test myself. There was no deception, no trick. The human simply has a natural ability that we did not anticipate." "Natural ability?" Vorath laughed bitterly. "The Corax have spent 10,000 years perfecting our hive mind coordination. The Luminari have existed since the birth of the universe. And you expect me to believe that these hairless primates from some backwater planet can do what we cannot?" "Belief is irrelevant," Zethel replied calmly. "The data speaks for itself. Jake Morrison achieved 98.6% synchronization. That is a fact. How he did it matters less than what we can do with this information." The debate continued for hours. Scientists were brought in to explain their theories about human neuroplasticity. Psychologists analyzed Jake's mental profile, looking for any sign of deception or hidden abilities. Military strategists calculated the tactical implications of having a fully operational horizon breaker. Meanwhile, Jake sat alone in a small room on the other side of the station. Katie Nguyen, a Coalition intelligence officer assigned as his handler, watched him through a glass window. She was also human, one of the few who had risen to a position of authority since their species joined the Coalition. Katie was 30 years old with long black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent years studying alien cultures, learning their languages, understanding their politics. She knew how dangerous this situation was. A single human had just upset the balance of power in the galaxy. Some species would see Jake as a savior. Others would see him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. She entered the room and sat down across from him. "How are you holding up?" Jake shrugged. "I have been better. I have also been worse. At least nobody is shooting at me yet." "Give it time," Katie said with a small smile. "Admiral Vareth is pushing hard for your detention. He wants you locked up in a research facility where scientists can study your brain." "Study my brain?" "That sounds unpleasant." "It would be. The Korax are not known for their gentle methods." Katie leaned forward, her expression serious. "Listen to me carefully, Jake. You have become the most valuable asset in the Coalition overnight. That makes you incredibly important, but it also makes you incredibly dangerous to certain people. There are species who would rather see you dead than let humans gain this kind of power." Jake met her gaze steadily. "So what do you suggest I do?" Before Katie could answer, alarms began to scream throughout the station. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Emergency broadcasts echoed from every speaker. Something terrible was happening. They rushed to the command center, where chaos had already erupted. Holographic displays showed a massive swarm fleet approaching the Meridian system. Thousands of bioorganic warships, each one a living nightmare of teeth and claws and acid. They were heading directly towards 7 inhabited worlds with a combined population of 3 billion people. Commander Zeth Al stood at the center of the chaos, barking orders to his officers. His 4 eyes were wide with fear. "How long until they reached the first colony?" 18 hours, a technician replied. "Our nearest fleet is 6 days away. We cannot get there in time." "What about evacuation?" "Impossible. There are too many civilians. We might save a few thousand before the swarm arrives. The rest will be consumed." The room fell silent. 3 billion lives. 3 billion people who would die because the Coalition could not protect them. It was the largest swarm attack in decades, and they were completely helpless to stop it. Vareth spoke up from his position near the back of the room. "We knew this day would come. The swarm is too powerful. Perhaps it is time to consider negotiating a retreat to the inner systems." "Retreat?" Zethel turned on him with fury in his eyes. "You would abandon 3 billion people to be eaten alive? I would save the trillions who remain. Sometimes hard choices must be made for the greater good." Katie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the argument. "There is another option. The Horizon Breaker can reach the Meridian system in 12 hours at maximum speed. It is the only weapon fast enough and powerful enough to stop the swarm fleet." "The Horizon Breaker requires 10 pilots," Vareth countered. "We do not have a compatible crew ready. The machine is useless." "We have 1 pilot," Katie said. "1 pilot who can control the entire mech by himself." Every eye in the room turned to Jake. He stood quietly near the doorway, watching the argument unfold. He had not asked to become the center of attention. He had not asked to carry the fate of 3 billion people on his shoulders. But life rarely asks permission before throwing impossible situations at him. Single quotes. Al looked at Jake with desperate hope. Can you do it? Can you pilot the Horizon Breaker alone against a full swarm invasion fleet? Jake thought about the question. He thought about the simulation he had experienced, the incredible power of the mech flowing through his mind. He thought about the swarm, the endless hunger that had consumed countless worlds. He thought about 3 billion people who would die if he said no. I do not know if I can win, Jake said honestly, but I know I can fight, and that is more than anyone else can offer right now. Vorith slammed his fist against a console. This is madness. You would trust our greatest weapon to an untested alien? If he fails, we lose the Horizon Breaker forever. If we do nothing, we lose the Meridian system forever, Zethel replied. He turned to Jake with a solemn expression. The decision is yours, human. Will you fight for us? Jake looked at the holographic display showing the swarm fleet. Thousands of ships. Millions of enemies. 3 billion innocent lives hanging in the balance. Get me to that mech, he said. It is time to show the galaxy what humans can do. Jake woke up in a white room that smelled like medicine and recycled air. His head felt like someone had filled it with broken glass, and his body refused to move when he told it to. For a long moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember who he was. Then the memories came flooding back. The battle. The swarm. The Horizon Breaker responding to his thoughts like an extension of his own body. The feeling of destroying an entire invasion fleet while his brain slowly burned itself out from the strain. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his skull like lightning. He fell back against the medical bed and groaned. A door opened somewhere to his left. Footsteps approached, and then Katie Nguyen appeared beside his bed. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept much recently. But she was smiling. Welcome back to the world of the living, she said. You had us worried for a while. How long was I out? Jake's voice came out as a rough whisper. 3 weeks. Your brain needed time to heal from the neural overload. The doctors said it was the worst case they had ever seen. They also said you should be dead, but apparently nobody told you that. Jake laughed weakly, which made his head hurt even more. I have always been bad at following rules. What happened while I was asleep? Katie pulled up a chair and sat down beside him. A lot. The swarm retreated from Coalition space after word spread about what you did. For the first time in 300 years, they are actually afraid of something. Intelligence reports suggest they are regrouping in the outer regions, trying to figure out how to deal with the Horizon Breaker. And the Coalition? That is more complicated. Katie's smile faded slightly. You became a symbol overnight, Jake. The human who saved 3 billion lives. The pilot who did what no other species could do. Some people are calling you a hero. Others are calling you a threat. Jake had expected as much. He had seen enough alien politics during his time at the station to know that power made people nervous. The Coalition had tolerated humans when they were weak and unimportant. Now that humans had proven they could be strong, some species would feel threatened. Admiral Varth? He asked, still pushing for restrictions on human access to Coalition technology. He wants laws that would prevent humans from piloting any vessel larger than a cargo ship. Some of the other species support him. They are afraid of what humanity might become. And what about our side? What do humans want? Katie was quiet for a moment. Recruitment applications from humans have increased by 8,000% since your battle. People back on Earth are watching the news feeds, seeing what you accomplished. For the first time, they are realizing that we do not have to be the weakest species in the galaxy. We can be something more. Jake thought about that. He thought about Earth, the world he had left behind years ago. He thought about all the wars and conflicts that had torn humanity apart throughout history. Humans fighting humans over land, resources, and ideas. So much energy wasted on destroying each other instead of building something greater. But out here, among the stars, humanity had a chance to be different. They had a chance to unite against a common enemy, to prove themselves worthy of standing beside species who had traveled the cosmos for millennia. They had a chance to show the galaxy what humans could really do. A week later, Jake was strong enough to leave the medical facility. His brain had healed faster than anyone expected. Another gift from the neural enhancement that still sat hidden in his skull. The doctors ran countless tests trying to understand how he had recovered so quickly, but he gave them no answers. Some secrets were worth keeping. The Coalition Assembly called an emergency session to address the human question. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Hall, their voices rising in heated argument. Admiral Vorath demanded restrictions. The Meridian Alliance demanded recognition of human contributions. Old allies turned against each other as fear and gratitude collided. Jake did not attend the debates. He had no interest in politics or speeches. Instead, he walked through the quiet corridors of Coalition Station 17 until he reached the hangar where the Horizon Breaker waited. The massive Mech stood in the center of the hangar, surrounded by repair teams and engineering drones. The battle had damaged it badly. Entire sections of armor needed to be replaced. Weapons systems required complete overhauls. The reactor itself had to be recalibrated after being pushed to its limits, but it was still there, still standing, still ready to fight. Jake walked up to the Mech's foot and placed his hand against the cold metal. He could almost feel the ghost of its systems, the memory of that incredible connection they had shared during the battle. The Horizon Breaker was just a machine, but it felt like something more. It felt like a partner. Katie found him there an hour later. She had news from the assembly. They reached a decision, she said. Humans will not face restrictions. The vote was close, but the Meridian Alliance convinced enough species that humanity had earned its place in the coalition. We are going to be given equal status with every other member race. Jake nodded slowly. That is good. There is more. The coalition wants to form a new unit around the Horizon Breaker. A rapid response team that can deploy anywhere in the galaxy to counter swarm incursions. They want you to lead it. Jake turned to look at her. Me? I am just a pilot. You are more than that now. You are a symbol. The human who changed everything. Katie stepped closer, her expression serious. But it is your choice. You can walk away from all of this if you want. You have done enough. Nobody would blame you. Jake thought about her offer. He thought about walking away, finding some quiet corner of the galaxy where he could live out his days in peace. He thought about never sitting in that command sphere again, never feeling the strain of the neural interface pushing his brain to the breaking point. But then he thought about the swarm, still out there, still hungry, still planning their next attack on innocent worlds. He thought about all the humans who would follow in his footsteps, young pilots who would volunteer to serve in a war they barely understood. They would need someone to show them the way. They would need someone who had walked through fire and survived. Humanity was never meant to stay small, Jake said quietly. We were meant for this. For all of it. He looked up at the Horizon Breaker, his partner, his weapon, his burden. Behind him, he could hear engineers shouting orders and repair drones humming with activity. The Mech would be ready soon. And when it was, Jake would be there to answer the call. The coalition had needed 10 pilots to control their greatest weapon. They had searched for centuries, testing every species in the galaxy, failing again and again to find minds capable of bearing the load. In the end, they found something better. They found humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same.